Well, let's talk now to Marc Ostwald, who's Chief Economist and Global Strategist at ADM ISI. Good to see you, Marc. Thanks for joining us again on the programme. So some pretty positive numbers out of China, including those industrial production figures. Why is it all looking so good?
Well, to a certain extent, one always has to be a little bit careful at the moment because the comparison is with this time last year, just as China was coming out of the zero COVID policy and there was a lot of disruption. Nevertheless, I think the important part of this data is it basically shows the economy is stabilizing. So some of the measures which have been introduced over the last 3 to 6 months are having an effect. But if you bore down into, and I think one really does need to take a much more forensic look, I think in terms of retail sales, what you really see is the same trend we've seen everywhere after COVID. Namely, that you're getting a swing away from goods consumption to services consumption. So you saw a lot of strength in things like catering, by going to restaurants. You saw strength in travel, obviously related to the Lunar New Year holidays. On the other hand, goods spending is really very, very weak. And same with industrial production, basically you're seeing a lot of strength in autos. That's great news. You're seeing a lot of strength in electronics, also good news. That's definitely a sign that those measures to bolster the renewable energy sector and also the high-tech sector are working. So it's mixed, but it's generally positive. The property sector remains an eyesore, and it will take time to resolve. It's not something where one can wave a magic wand, particularly in terms of restoring consumer confidence.
Well, let's talk about the property sector, because as you say, that's still an area of concern when it comes to China's economy. How do you think it might end up affecting economic growth?
Well, for the time being, I think what we're seeing, particularly given the weakness that we're now seeing in the iron and steel sector prices, is it's definitely weighing on things where, where basically the primary driver is basically residential property. So it's demand for things like cement for iron and steel for copper to a certain extent, though copper demand is also driven by renewables. So, it's a matter of regaining the confidence. Interest rate cuts really won't do it. I don't even think actually lowering deposits ratios for new properties. It is a general sense, and this is probably the most important part within the data, the rise in unemployment is a bit disappointing. What you really want to see is wages picking up a little bit, which is difficult in an environment when basically prices are not moving. The producer prices are negative and consumer prices are barely positive. That doesn't really justify a lot of businesses, upping wages significantly, but perhaps there are measures which could be undertaken to incentivize that, and that would probably encourage people to look at the property sector in a slightly different way.
Well, you talk there about prices not moving. We did see a recent slight rise in inflation, but despite that, there have been some concerns from some analysts about China potentially facing stagnation, a bit like Japan. What do you think China needs to do to try and avoid that situation?
Well, I think the route it's going down with trying to resolve the property sector balance sheet problems. This was a problem in Japan, but most people have sort of forgotten about it during Japan's worst, particularly its lost decade. That's important. And to continue, and this is probably the bit which is understated in all the data, the renewables sector and the high-tech sector are driving growth in China at the moment, and to a much greater extent than the GDP numbers and indeed the industrial production numbers are actually telling us. And that's a very important part because it is the way forward. And as energy costs get reduced thanks to greater renewable contribution, that will help the economy. And it will also help to boost business confidence.
Marc, great to talk to you as always. Thank you for joining us. Marc Ostwald from ADM Investor Services International.